This is an interview with Anita Nagler for the SEC Historical Society's Virtual Museum and Archive on the History of Financial Regulation. Today is November 12th, 2025. I'm Kenneth Durr. Anita, welcome. Good to talk to you today.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Let's get a little background before we jump into your SEC career. Are you from Chicago originally?
I am.
Okay, and
Mhm.
you got your education there?
Yeah, well, yeah, in Illinois. Yeah. And I started at the Chicago office, straight out of law school,
Okay, that was around 1980, I guess.
1980.
Talk about interviewing with the Chicago office and I guess more importantly, talk about what made you want to go there.
Um, well, uh, I actually have an undergraduate degree in social work,
Hmm.
which is people always find that interesting since I basically spent, half my career at the SEC and then half my career in the investment management business as a senior CEO. That I have no investment or accounting background. Um, so I was really in going to law school driven by wanting to do work in the public interest. Um, but I ended up, surprising to me, I guess, really taking to the law and doing very, very well in law school. And so, had the opportunity to have like a summer, associate thing and, between second and third year
Okay.
and have a lot of interviewing opportunities. And what I realized in law school was that the courses that I found the most intellectually challenging were the courses that were more like securities law, tax, corporate, kind of more complex
Hmm.
constitutional law. It's been particularly interesting these days. Um, Whereas what I realized was that the type of law that was utilized in a lot of legal public interest type work was really much more mundane, legally important for individuals, but more mundane legally, landlord tenant or whatever. So when I started interviewing in my third year, I was looking to do public interest work, but that involved legally sophisticated issues.
Okay.
Yeah. And I wasn't interested in going to a law firm. My summer gig had convinced me I didn't want to do that straight out of law school. So,
Okay. Talk about the interview at the Chicago regional office. Who did you talk to and what was it like?
well, I mostly primarily remember, I can't remember a bunch of people I talked to, but I primarily remember talking to two individuals because one is my current husband. And one is a very good friend of ours still to this day, Phil Stern. So, yeah, yeah. I actually, the reason I particularly remember that, besides the personal connection, is that, I was probably the last interview of the day for those two. And sorry, my phone's ringing, so I'm putting it off. And they were punchy, and so they were sort of more interested in just joking between the two of them. And I found it kind of annoying. And, I considered myself a hot commodity. And so I kind of called them to task on that. And anyways, my husband still jokes about that at cocktail parties. Anyways,
What was the training like? Did they just throw you in to get on the job training, or was there a specific program that you went through?
there was some kind of program where we flew to Washington, and I'm trying to remember, maybe it was like a day or two. It wasn't, to tell you the truth, I don't remember the training like legal or procedural or anything like that. The mostly what I remember is um, Sorkin was maybe head of enforcement then or
Mhm.
whatever, and him talking about the need to never appear compromised. That any kind of appearance of conflict, that was the gauge, the appearance, not the actual conflict. Frankly, that's the only thing I remember.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So you would have started as a staff attorney, is that right?
I was a staff attorney in enforcement. I had the opportunity. to work with some really terrific lawyers. One of the lawyers, for example, I remember working with in those first 2 years when I was in Chicago, was a guy named Pete Schaefer. He was senior trial counsel, and he was just, a lawyer's lawyer. And I, learned a lot from him. Just, you come out of law school and you don't know how to even formulate a question that's appropriate in testimony or deposition. And so it's stuff like that more, yeah, I
Just
remember.
just working with people and
Yeah,
picking up
yeah.
their
And
expertise.
the SEC had, there was a tremendous many layers of review. So that process of writing and having it edited, and then meetings at the next layer, and comments and questioning assertions and what the factual basis was before it ever got to Washington to be considered. That in itself is an enormous educational process.
Right. What kind of cases were you involved in? What kind of things would you have been writing about and getting review about?
Well, I mean, the way enforcement works is, you first get just a file, and you kind of make a determination if something should happen, and you open what used to be called a MUI, like a matter under investigation. But if you for subpoena power, you had to write a memo to the commission to get subpoena power, and so that was a writing process of formulating what generated enough interest, red flags to impose on people with subpoenas. So that would be an example. And then obviously, if you were going to file an action, you had to write another memo um, that sorry,
That's okay.
my husband's calling me. I don't know why he's doing that. He's at the doctor. Um, to actually file an action in administrative court, and that was rigorously reviewed. So yeah.
Okay. Did you get to know Bill Goldsberry very well?
Oh yeah, very well. Very, very well. I mean, Bill, promoted me a number of times. So,
Okay. What kind of guy was he?
you know, he kind of, this is a weird thing to say, but it probably dates me too. He's kind of like a Johnny Carson kind of guy. Like he had that kind of way about him. Like, yeah, I don't know. If
Good
anybody knows Johnny
personality.
Carson, I mean, he wasn't a comedian, but he had kind of uh, like the kind of guy you might want to go out for a cocktail with, or, he would take groups of people. He had a boat, he had a big sailboat. It wasn't his, it was like a friend of his, but he had a deal where if he took care of the boat, he could sail it. So, and he sailed it all the time. So he used to take people out on it. And, he was kind of I don't know, not really a party guy at all. Actually, he was quite formal in many ways, but I don't know. He's like Johnny Carson. I don't know how else to. That's
That's
the
pretty
best
good.
description of him. Yeah.
Very personable, I guess.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah. Although he could be, I got along with him really great, but like if he had high expectations, and if people disappointed him, I mean, he was feared, or, not feared, but yeah, you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about some early cases, things from back in that early period.
Uh-huh.
One that I came across was SEC versus Professional Association. There was a person named Robert Labine,
Right.
um, and they were doing unregistered trust investments. And I think
Right.
you argued that in court, if I believe. Can you tell me about that?
Uh, that was a temporary restraining order, and I think it went to a preliminary injunction. And that was the level I was involved at. And that's kind of a big deal. I mean, I was a young attorney. But I noticed what you sent me that on the agenda, and I noticed it went to the Sixth Circuit, and my name was on that. And I didn't argue in front of the Sixth Circuit. I
Okay.
probably was involved in, reviewing uh, the briefs or something like that. It was such a long time ago, I don't remember. But in a way, that case was relatively simple in the sense. I think the issue that went to the Sixth Circuit related to whether or not they were actually selling securities, and that we had a lot of cases like that where you had to fit fraudulent, investment contract analysis of a fraud. But and my memory is that case involved them selling, well, I think they were selling various things, but one of them was like fractional and divided interest in master record deals, which, is just some weird thing. But I think what's interesting about that case, and it reflects a variety of cases that we were doing in that time frame that's unique to that time frame, was that was before the tax code was amended. And there was just a large number of straight out fraudulent deals that only made sense if you got the tax write-offs. And I don't remember then, like, you could get, you'd invest $1 and you could write off $4, or I don't even remember. It was highly abusive tax shelter kind of thing. And because of that, they could be sold to not wealthy people. So, for example, that was in the middle of Michigan. It was being sold to guys. I mean, I interviewed witnesses who at 2 in the afternoon who were going on their 4 o'clock shift, at Ford Motor.
Mhm.
And there was also at the time, there particularly, a very anti-government sentiment. So there was part of the appeal of the selling these deals was this was a way to not only not pay taxes, but kind of screw the government or whatever. And besides them being a fraud, one of the unfortunate things about those for the investors is that not only did they lose their money, but they didn't get the tax write-off because it was a fraud. Even then in these abusive tax shelters, there had to be like some substance to the deal. And this was just, an embezzlement or just a fraud. So these people got like double whammied. And, even, even though we, affidavits and stuff, were able to establish, that the money was being used for the kids, their sons, to buy Oriental rugs or whatever. It was just a straight up fraud, not legally complicated. I remember when we went to the court, I think that was Flint. I think it was filed in Flint, Michigan, which was really, really devastated at the time by a lot of the changes that were happening in unionization and globalization, offshoring for the auto industry, which is, makes it particularly sad for the people who got screwed over. We had to deal with picketing at the courthouse.
Wow.
Where people, were like very negative about the fact that we were in there trying to shut this fraud down and freeze assets. So
Hmm.
that's what made that case kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the people you were trying to protect were actually protesting against shutting this down.
Well, I don't think, not again, not without getting into current politics, not dissimilar to
Right.
current events where I think people sometimes protest without an understanding of how they're being hurt economically. And these people were totally being hurt. I mean, they were being like, money was being stolen from these people and they were going to lose their tax write-off. I suppose I suppose that by us proving that it was a fraud, we were screwing them over in tax court. Um, but that's kind of a weird way of thinking about it because my guess is the IRS would have figured that out too. But we had a number of cases like that. I mean, that was master record deal. I remember we had a case involving like supposedly like you invested in this and they were going to invest in Rex rabbit farms in Saudi Arabia. I mean, really weird shit that was just total uh, abusive tax shelters. But then when the tax code was rewritten and you couldn't do that anymore, all those cases just, like that whole thing didn't happen anymore. There was just different kinds of fraud, so
Okay.
yeah.
And you went to Los Angeles fairly quickly after you started, right?
Right. Yeah, that was just a personnel thing. There was a guy in our office in Chicago, one of the branch chiefs had gone out there to become the head of enforcement. And by then my husband and I were a couple and public couple. And we were he kind of solicited us to come out. So we did. Yeah.
Give me a little compare and contrast between the Chicago regional office and the Los Angeles regional office. How were they different?
Uh, well, they were extremely different. I mean, one, Chicago, is a financial center like New York. And because of that, there, you know, it has, I'm not that, I don't know what's going on at the SEC right now, but it had always had a really excellent examination department, a regulatory side of the office, because there were so many people to regulate in our region. We had a number of exchanges just down the street from us. And then because we had such a great examination group, we we would get pretty sophisticated referrals out of those groups, and then which then made a lot of the cases that we did more sophisticated.
Mhm.
And uh, at the time in LA, you know, I think it's probably still true. I don't know if there's any kind of stock exchange in LA. The cases tended to be uh, more um, just kind of more straight out fraud, or I don't want to say simpler, but sort of less sophisticated. And I think that too, in Chicago, there were a lot of really career government people there. The investigatory team on the enforcement side, were just a really, really experienced team who had come to the SEC with, incredible experience in other places, either from the brokerage industry. We had a guy who spent, like a bunch of years at the CIA doing white collar stuff. The regulatory people were just an incredible depth of experience. And even then, New York, Los Angeles had a relatively higher turnover. I think that, is reflective of the fact that it was just a much more expensive city, and it's very difficult then even to live on a government salary. And so there tended to be a little more of that, 3 to 6 year thing and then roll out. Whereas you had some of that in Chicago, but you had a lot of people who really made it a career or stayed there for quite a while. And that just changes uh, the type of work an office can do.
In what
You know,
way?
well, again, I don't want to, we're seeing it right now. If you've got lawyers for the government going in to court who've never been in court before, you know,
Yeah.
that often doesn't go well, or you don't even get into court because you just don't have the staff to put that case together. Um, or you don't have the regulatory staff, the exam staff to see. And this is, back then, now, oh my God, the markets have gotten so much more complex, and the level of experience that examiners would need now to go in and see issues. Um, it's it,
Okay.
it, it's not rocket science, but it's kind of close to rocket science.
Yeah.
So
So that experience wasn't necessarily there in a place like LA.
it wasn't. And but the cases that the bottom line is there's a lot of cases to be done. The SEC does some tiny little bit of what's out there. And, part of running an enforcement program is trying to utilize your human resources, which is the primary resource that you have, in a way that's the most effective. And so there's plenty of cases. And so you just end up picking, so there were plenty of cases to do out there, that's for sure. They were just a different kind of case. So it felt very different, I guess is the point.
Okay. Was Len Rawson the regional administrator?
Uh, no, the person who was there when we first started was Mike Stewart.
Okay.
was the regional administrator, and uh, he had come from, I think, Fort Worth or something like that. And but then Mike ended up leaving. I had three regional administrators in the 2 years I was
Oh,
there.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was Mike Stewart. Then we had an interim regional administrator who was Bobby Lawyer, who had been running the San Francisco office. And then in the end, um, my God, who was the third one? Because I think it was just like the last month or two before
Hmm.
where I left. Maybe that was when uh, uh, Sanders had been hired, but maybe he hadn't come in. I can't remember. Yeah. Yeah,
Nice.
so that's an example. I mean, the guy who had actually brought us out as a turnover, I mean, the guy who actually had brought us out there ended up leaving and going to Washington, joining the general counsel's office. I don't know, like 7 or 8 months after I joined there. And then Mike Stewart never replaced him. So I was a branch chief by then, and there were three of us. It's a much bigger office now, I think. Um, we all just reported directly to him, the regional administrator. I mean, it's crazy. I was two and a
Yeah.
half years out of law school. I mean,
Well, you got some things done besides all that sort of churn in the
no,
staffing.
no. I mean, in a way, it was really great because I uh, I got enormous experience. Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of the cases that you handled there. There was something called Bishop Baldwin, which looked particularly interesting. I think the defendant was making claims about the CIA or something like that.
Yeah, sorry. I'm
That's
texting my
okay.
husband's texting me, he's at the doctor. Um, yeah, so actually when I was in LA, there were three big kind of emergency cases, and Bishop Baldwin was one of them. And again, it was just one of these like straight out frauds, just like a Ponzi scheme ultimately. But it was a unique case in the sense that um, well, big picture, the name of the it was in Honolulu. That's part of our region.
Mhm.
And I don't even remember what he was selling, what he said he was selling, because it was irrelevant, because it was all just money being stolen. But, some kind of, I'm going to invest in blah, 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 and whatever. And the office and the name of the firm was Bishop Baldwin, Rewald, Dillingham, and Wong. Well, in Honolulu, names like Bishop and Dillingham, I mean, this is like Rockefeller. Like there's,
Yeah.
you know, highways with these names. But the guy, Rewald, he had been like a Nike shoe salesman in Milwaukee and went out to Honolulu, I don't know, whatever. And then he just created this whole thing. It's just bullshit. But somehow he was able to, ingratiate himself into whatever Honolulu society and join the Honolulu Polo Club and whatever. All of this with stolen money. And had a beautiful office. I know because we ended up, using his office after we sued. We were seizing documents and stuff. With beautiful office overlooking Honolulu with waterfall in his office and the whole thing. Um, anyways, it was just a straight up fraud. I mean, it came to our desk and they said they were using, whatever, some big law firm and some big accountant firm who'd never heard of him. And so right off the bat, we just knew it was a complete fraud. And so we went over to Honolulu to file a temporary restraining order to seize assets and documents to preserve the status quo. And we got that right away. And then between that and getting the order signed, because we had to do some modification, the U.S. Attorney's Office stepped in and sealed all the documents because the CIA had gotten involved, because it turned out that um, uh, um, part of this guy's fraud had been that he was like an international businessman. He had offices in all like Kuala Lumpur and Dubai and whatever. like 8 or 9 offices, his materials. And it was very, look cool, look really sophisticated with pictures. And, it was all bullshit. But he apparently had approached the CIA somewhere in the middle of this fraud. I mean, this is just, kind of reflects the ingenuity of some of these people. That he was, this international businessman, and he had these offices in these places, and he offered the use of his organization to be used as cover for undercover agents in those countries. So if you were a CIA agent or whatever in Kuala Lumpur, you could say you worked at Bishop Baldwin, blah, blah, blah's office and use their address or whatever, not use their address. I don't know. And if he was flying, maybe he would take documents, or I don't know, whatever. Now, of course, this is pre everything, pre cell phones, pre. And so then because of that, it turned out that there were documents within the files that, might reveal agents and stuff like that. Anyways, it was me and 2 other young lawyers, and we're in Honolulu, and all of this is happening. So now the judge is like, well, I'm going to freeze things, but you can't look at the documents until the CIA gets here from Washington, review documents. And in the meantime, sets up a preliminary injunction trial like 10 days later. So we can't go home. And then in the meantime, the Rewald guy, I don't remember his first name, attempted suicide.
Wow.
Slit his wrist. So, I mean, I'm laughing. I'm only laughing because it was like crazy,
Uh-huh.
So he's in the hospital, and with his arms strapped to a hospital bed, and we have to go to the hospital to serve him with the documents because you need to have personal service, whatever. So it was, crazy. It was a crazy case. But I mean, only crazy for those reasons. Again, legally, it was relatively simple. I mean, once you got in and looked at the, bank records and accounting records, he was just stealing money. And, it was one of those cases where, he talked his private secretary into investing, her child's college education. I mean, I always think like it's one thing to steal money from strangers. It's another thing like steal money from somebody who works with you every day, especially when you're raising millions of dollars where you need their 20,000. I don't know. But yeah, so that was that case.
And there was another one, maybe kind of similar, with a fairly colorful, shameless individual, Marshall Zoll.
Right. That was another LA case. The case that I did was in LA. I think there were a number of cases done across the SEC involving him over the years because he was sort of a serial fraudster. There's been a fair amount written in the popular press about Marshall Zoll. But again, when you think about these cases factually, what he was doing, and I feel like what he did, I think it was actually a public, I have to think back. I think it was actually a public company. I think his scam usually was that he would get these shell companies that what used to be the pink sheets, over the counter stock, and get some shell company and then like just create a kind of fictitious business for the company utilizing having very aggressive PR agents, having these PR parties. And so that particular case in San Diego involved, there was some big deal hotel fire that happened around this time frame where people were trapped in a high rise. And there was something, I can't remember, but it was pretty, it was a lot of press. And so the company that this market manipulation was involving, because it was like you'd manipulate the stock and then dump it. We call them pump and dump stocks.
Right.
But it involved a company that supposedly had created a device that you would sell to hotels, high-rise hotels, that people could like rip off the wall and then wrap around the toilet, and then you'd have something to throw through the window, and then like a harness, and you could jump out the window. And they had a big PR thing, and it was in Vegas, and the whole thing was in Vegas. And the company was based in Vegas, and they I think PR, the big party was in Vegas. It was all Vegas based. And yeah, so we filed in the Nevada court. And but again, once you just proved this was just complete bullshit. But that so that case was just what it was. But and he did a lot of other cases that were very interesting. I actually feel like the Chicago office had a Marshall Zope case, but I can't remember. But I remember talking to my investigator there. Is that's actually the only case in which one of our witnesses like kind of disappeared in the desert. So I mean, it was not our wheelhouse. But because there was a criminal investigations done, and we ended up working with the U.S. attorney on, in general, the case because it was clearly also a criminal case. But yeah, yeah, he kind of, a lot of these cases, and one of the cases I know we're going to talk about in a minute, Tommy Quinn, but these kind of cases often involved organized crime because it was a way to launder money.
Okay.
It was sort of like the pump and dump cases were the early crypto cases in a way, because it was a way to move money internationally. Um,
Okay.
Dirty money. Yeah. So,
Um, any other highlights from working in LA, either the office, the management, the culture that we should talk about before we move on?
I mean, no, I mean, just that I wouldn't want to take away, like, I wouldn't want to, I had terrific experience in Los Angeles. I mean, I was doing things very unusual for someone, with the number of years out of law school that I was. So that was really great. And they all worked out well. So it wasn't like irresponsible of the agency. And I work with great people. Again, the people, very dedicated government officials. And, but it's hard to retain government people in very expensive cities,
Mm.
So
Why did you decide to go back to Chicago? Was it for that reason? Because the expense in LA?
no, it was totally personal. By then my husband and I got married. We got married in LA. We took the bar in LA, so a member of the California bar, but we got married and we just wanted to start a family, and we felt like Chicago was a better place to do that. And I had the opportunity to go back to the Chicago office. Bob was at a point in his career where it made sense for him to go into the private sector. And yeah, so.
Okay. So you came back as special counsel enforcement. That's
Yeah,
really
and
good.
that was literally just because they wanted me to come back, and there wasn't a branch. I was a branch chief in LA. There wasn't a branch chief's job open. So they said, "Well, come back as a special counsel," which was the same grade level. And then the first branch chief job that opens up, you'll go in there. And I think I was only special counsel for a few months. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just really wondering why the distinction.
Yeah, no, it was just a way to navigate around
Okay.
gov- government stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You mentioned 40 Act real briefly a while back, and Chicago is known for doing a lot of 40 Act cases.
right.
Um, why is that? And what kind of expertise is required that's different?
I think that like the 40X stuff, I'd say that probably, if you did an analysis, it's not only 40 Act, but a lot of regulatory enforcement work probably came out of Chicago. And again, I think it stems back to the fact that there was just an excellent examination team there. Um, anyways, but again, 40 Act is like 40 Act could be as banal as a registered investment advisor who is stealing money,
Mhm.
a fairly banal, legally banal case. Just you get to charge 40 Act violations because he's a registered investment advisor. To very sophisticated cases involving mutual funds, or sophisticated elements of the 40 Act involving, how money's managed or, things that come out of an examination. Um, and because we had such a great examination staff and really good investigators, there was a willingness to do those kind of cases and try those kind of cases if necessary, because we knew we could do it. Versus, an office that just didn't have that depth of experience, and you need people who can testify, so yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned the exam staff, and I'm interested in how exams worked with enforcement in Chicago. Was it very close? Were you working with them from the beginning on, or would they, take a lot of time, build up their portfolio and give it to you? How did that work?
Yeah, no, I mean, really, it was two totally separate sides. The exam program and its agenda, who they selected, etc., was driven by priorities directed from income. I think now it'd be like truly directed from Washington, but at the time, I think it was more collaborative of priority areas, but also, making sure that firms were in rotations and whatever the exam priorities are. And so that was a completely separate thing that we did not have any involvement in. I think the only time that we might direct an exam would be if something came to our attention that was a red flag, that we would say, you might want to use the examination authority to look at this or whatever. Although that in itself even was a little bit, at the time, there was a sensitivity to not having the exam group do enforcement work without the firm understanding that it was, maybe an enforcement lawyer would go along, so everybody kind of knew what was happening or whatever. Even though we had the right to do that, we had the right to go into any kind of regulatory firm, but there was just a sensitivity. So typically the way we worked is they would do their exams, and maybe in the middle of the exam or maybe at the end, they would say, we think there's a problem here, and make a referral. Obviously, if it was ongoing, it would come to us much more quickly.
Mhm.
But a lot of times these would be things that would come that, were done and dusted, so to speak. So uh I don't want to talk about anything in case I don't want to talk about anything that didn't actually turn into a
Yeah,
case. So
that's
I'm trying
fine.
to remember if this particular did, but let me just say there was we did the exam team did an extensive exam of a very large broker dealer who was involved in a lot of collateralized loan, kind of made the market in it. Maybe you can guess who that was. And there was a real issue about how much you haircut their assets for purposes of net capital that could have actually brought down, in fact, that market,
Mhm.
if, because kind of like you could trigger a liquidity crisis because of if you increase the net capital. And that would have been a really good example of an extremely sophisticated case that, just some other offices didn't have the capability to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so were you moving into administration at this point? Were you doing more directing other teams in enforcement work?
Well, I mean, I became a branch chief in LA. So, basically from 2000, or wait, not 2000, Jesus, 1980,
Oh,
late
I would have been
1982 or
84.
early 1993, whatever, I had been supervising people. I, had four lawyers. But somewhere in there, I became the assistant regional administrator. Um, so our office was growing, and so there had always been one person who was head of enforcement, the assistant regional administrator. And then Bill wanted to, he liked two of us anyway, so he ended up splitting the role and having two assistant regional administrators, which made sense because we had more branches. So it was always, the idea was that you would supervise like X number of branches under you, because then that translated into four more lawyers. It was sort of like a pyramid thing.
Mhm.
And then I was actually, I'm trying to remember, I was I was getting bored. Yeah, I don't, and I was thinking, actually the person who was the head of the regulatory side was leaving, and I was thinking of applying for that, just for something different. And Bill wanted me to stay in enforcement. So then the position of associate regional administrator was created for the first time in the office, to then become the head of enforcement, overseeing the assistant regional administrators, and I became the associate. Um, yeah, so
So
yeah,
you
then
managed a lot of people.
so yeah, I'm saying by then, administrative is kind of a funny word because it sounds like paper pushing, but you're managing a lot of people. You're just constantly reviewing, have people in your office reviewing cases, making decisions, collaborative decisions, reviewing what goes up, what goes down,
Mhm.
etc. But you're not in court anymore. Yeah.
Um, there was, at least from some perspectives, the regional offices were more able to be generalists. They almost had to, because any kind of thing could come their way, as opposed to folks in Washington. Do you think that was the case?
Uh, well, I mean, if you're a generalist, if all you're doing is securities cases, I mean, if you're a lawyer in a law firm, I think generally, like, if you're a securities lawyer, you do securities cases. But yeah, I guess we were generalist securities lawyers. Yeah. I guess that's interesting that you're making that comment, because I always thought that enforcement people in Washington did a wide range of cases.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just something I picked up along the way looking at regional offices. The other thing I
Yeah.
picked up was that there was sometimes a bit of tension between the regions and the home office. Did
Yeah.
you get any of
I think
that?
that well, it's all different now, because I think there was some point where Washington sort of, my understanding is Washington, everything is directed out of Washington now.
Right.
But I would say that in Chicago, I think other offices had that issue more than we did in Chicago, because Chicago was considered, well, we were told, and we thought, and we believed it, that we were the best regional office. And we would always get very, very high rankings every year. They would do an evaluation process. And that there was a tremendous amount of confidence from the group in Washington that was sort of the interface with the regional offices, in the work that came out of our office. That if we sent up a memoranda recommending this or that, there was a tremendous amount of deference given um, to what we were recommending. Beyond deference, I guess also, like, they believed that if we said something, it was true. That the not like other people were lying, but that there was enough review at our level that it wasn't going to be something where somebody got to court and the evidence wasn't there.
Hmm.
And then also, if we were pushing, not new legal theories, but more complicated legal theories, that we were good lawyers and we could argue that. And so in general, we really had an excellent relationship with Washington. Um, Not to say there weren't times where, you just want to get something done and it isn't happening at your pace. But in general, we had a very, very good relationship with Washington.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't think that was true of other offices.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you work with Jim Clarkson?
Yeah. Uh-huh. I mean, work with them. I think Bill Goldsberry worked with Jim more.
Okay, yeah.
Um, but Jim was sort of the guy in Washington that if we needed to make things happen, you'd go to Jim, but not really case related. So, which is why Bill was, so it might be budget related or staffing related. If we felt like we needed to grow our staff or redefine, um, there was a point where we were trying to create like a new, I called it like a transition class between what was then secretaries, and then investigator lawyers, but kind of a paralegal or like a junior investigator, because there were people who were administrative assistants. That's what the word. It's like uh, who just because they were smart and they had initiative and um, they had been given increased responsibility on cases to do kind of junior investigatory work. Anyways, so that was something like when I was associate regional administrator, I tried to push because it would give a career path, because most at the time virtually all the administrative assistants were women, give them a career path. And so you would involve Bill Clark or Jim Clarkson in something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
an example.
Did that
Yeah.
initiative work out? The
Yeah,
sort of
yeah, we did. I
transition?
mean, when I was there, we created, I think, one or two of those positions. I would hope there's more of them because there were some really smart people and they deserve to make more money, and they actually, were very valuable in those jobs. So
Okay. Yeah, okay. That having to do with that, the mid to late 80s across the SEC, there was something of a staffing shortage. Did you have that problem in Chicago?
in the 80s,
I believe in the 80s, not, or maybe the early 90s, but at some point there was some of the regional offices were really hit with a staffing problem.
I mean, like they couldn't fill the jobs or they
Yeah,
didn't have enough jobs.
yeah, couldn't fill the jobs.
Oh no, we never had an issue filling
Okay,
jobs.
okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was a really, it was considered a very prestigious job. In fact, I would say that, like when I first joined, most of the people who were hired were people like me, straight out of law school, top of their class, kind of people. And later, now when I'm back at the Chicago office and I'm the associate, I'm running enforcement. Many more of the people we hired were actually people out of law firms, uh, like very prestigious law firms who wanted, this is what they wanted to do. They didn't, and took big pay cuts, and so I think that would indicate almost like the way the U.S. Attorney's Office used. I don't know what the U.S. Attorney's Office is doing now, but they used to not hire straight out of law school. They would hire people with really good experience, and so
Was that a decision that the Chicago office made to try to hire more people out of law firms, or did it just?
actually, if you've got somebody who's been trying cases for 7 years and working at Sidley and Austin, like hello, and they're willing, that's a very competitive person. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Um, uh, let's talk about some of the cases that you worked on in that later period in Chicago that your people worked on. And we mentioned Tommy Quinn a couple of times, and maybe we should spend a little time on that one. I've talked to a lot of people at the SEC. I'm not sure if Tommy Quinn ever came up, so I'm glad it did in this case.
Have you talked to other people at the Chicago office?
Jane Jarko, I believe.
Oh, Jay. Yeah.
Yeah, and probably some other folks that I don't remember at the
Because
moment.
Jane went over to regulation, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So tell me about Tommy Quinn.
Um,
Yeah, how did you find him and how did that work out?
I'm trying to remember how the case first came up, that we had two excellent investigators in the Chicago office, a guy named Stan Witten and a guy named John Brisman. And I feel like those cases, Tommy Quinn came from them. Um, they were such good investigators that we used to often lend them to criminal investigate, to work with the U.S. attorney in Chicago or New York or wherever. And I feel like it came out of that, like, this is such a long time ago, but Stan had been on, we kind of lent him to the U.S. attorney's office in New York. He was working on a case that was sort of a mobster case, but involving money laundering through brokerage firms
Mhm.
and some big manipulation thing or something. And I feel like maybe it came out of that, or, but I can't remember. Anyways,
That's okay.
yeah, but that case is related to Tommy Quinn. We ended up maybe having like 40, 50 cases over the years involved. There were so many arms and legs of that case. And, big picture, it was the classic pump and dump involving public companies, involving the public markets. But it was really an international level um, scheme involving numerous public companies, involving numerous broker dealers, primarily in the US. At the time, there were these uh, hubs of broker dealers who would often uh, where there were issues. And I'm saying this is a long time ago, but like Minneapolis, for example, it had a lot of sketchy broker dealers, and Boca Raton, Florida, had a bunch of sketchy broker dealers, and Denver had a bunch of sketchy broker dealers, and so the and you would know often if you saw like, oh, whoever in Denver, whatever, was acting as a market maker for a stock, it would be a trigger that maybe it was a pump and dump.
Mhm.
And it was just totally criminal behavior, and Tommy Quinn, and he had a cohort. What was that guy's name? Anyways, they ultimately operated out of Europe, and so Interpol was involved, and there were a bunch of PR firms, dirty PR firms that would just pump out this bullshit PR stuff out of New Jersey. And I mean, it was like the same players, but there were like 40 of them. And a lot of it was to clean dirty money. These be fictitious brokerage accounts that would be opened, and accounts would be opened to the names of people's dogs, and uh, a lot of stuff to stay under. So the activity in particular accounts stayed under certain levels, and um, but there were ended up being a lot. But besides him being sued, there was a lot of broker dealers that were administrative cases were brought and barred, accounting firms. But again, like accounting firms out of Jersey City,
Mhm.
not like Price Waterhouse. And then at some point, so Interpol was involved because there was some of the proceeds from all this fraud were being funneled into weapons trading in Europe. And I mean, it was really like, this was like a movie. And so there were some very high profile arrest situations that happened in Europe. There was some big gun runner in the Netherlands or Belgium whose house was like, you know, where they came in with those kind of gun things that like smash down doors and stuff like that. Yeah, and it went on for a number of years. It's very interesting. And, while we were investigating, bringing all these cases, another case would pop up. I mean, it was an amazing, the flagrantness of all of this. And it's like bugging the shit out of me. I can't remember the name of the other guy.
There was a guy named Kim's.
Oh yeah, Robert Kemp's.
Yep.
Yeah. But there was a huge chateau in the south of France that was seized, and um, yeah, it was like they should have made a movie out of it. Maybe they still will. Um,
So for you, it was a matter of tracing the threads uh,
exactly.
from
Yeah,
Quinn to
tracing.
all these little brokerages.
Exactly. Or look, we're watching the pink sheets, or watching aberrant price activity, and I mean, there's a lot of red flags, right? Or you could actually literally look at certain PR firms and see what company they were promoting. A lot of red flags, and yeah, the cases just continued to pop up, and we had it's not like we had a devoted team that only did these cases, but there were a team of people who did those cases and then did other cases too. But it went on for a number of years, um, just churning out these cases, churning out those cases. Uh, so
Um, any other cases that were notable during that period, sort of later on when you're administering?
you know, not as kind of exciting or fun, but one of the cases that we brought later, what involving a mutual fund up in Milwaukee, and it was a valuation issue, and it wasn't exciting, but it's a case that I think was one of the first cases in which a mutual fund was sued on a valuation, on a portfolio valuation issue involving debt. And later, when the market kind of blew out and a lot of these mutual funds, there were issues with the way that they were pricing, particularly very illiquid debt instruments. That case has come up a lot as being kind of like
Mhm.
seminal case.
Was
As
this Mark Bailey?
no,
No, okay.
anyway, no, it was actually we sued the mutual fund, the Heartland funds up in Milwaukee. Which are perfectly, sometimes I'm hesitant to like say these things because like they're, not like a very different than the Tommy Quinn, where it was just really bad broker dealer. I mean, just it's like that movie with Leo
DiCaprio.
yes, yes, where it's like just he's just running an office. It's just like a pump and dump,
Right.
office where they all stand on desks. And like literally that movie was realistic, because that was exactly the kind of thing that was going on. Where they
The
just
mutual fund valuation
Mhm.
issue. Did you realize at the time that this was something that could be important precedent and that you really needed to pay
Yeah, I
attention
mean,
to?
that was a case where there was a lot of conversation with Washington and the 40 Act group there, because yeah, my memory is that case involved a security that wasn't repriced for a number of months, and because it was so illiquid. And so we knew that it would be something that the mutual fund industry would look to as guidance on how to handle those kind of situations, those kind of pricing situations. And having been on the flip side of the business, having been a senior executive at an investment management firm and an officer of a mutual fund, um, I know from that side of the business that you struggle on that. You're trying to do things right, and you're trying to know how to do it and how to approach when you have, illiquid things, and what the right valuation procedure is, and blah, 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 blah. So we knew that it would have that significance, and there was a lot of conversation um, about how to formulate that case. So
So you worked closely with Washington on that one.
yeah, that'd be the kind of thing where we would just, do the case, and then we would have our recommendation. But when the memorandum went to Washington to recommend action, there'd be a lot of people dialoguing about it. And that case settled. I mean, it was positive it settled. And So also the structure of the settlement, how it would be articulated, because we knew in that situation, the settlement document itself would function as a roadmap for the industry struggling with these kind of valuation issues. So
Okay. Um, you were in enforcement, the Remedies Act, the passage of the Remedies Act, um, changed things a bit. Was that your experience?
uh, you're going to have to remind me of that. What year
Uh,
was that?
Basically, it gave the SEC the ability to impose. Uh, I don't remember the specifics, but it gave the SEC the ability to impose greater penalties. But if you don't, if it
That
didn't make
when
it,
was that amended?
what's that?
What year was that?
I think it was the very early 90s, 91 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, because I left the SEC in 1993.
Right. Yeah, I have a question about
I
that.
don't actually, that's like not, I don't remember like some event where we were like, oh, wow, this is some,
Okay,
yeah. And so maybe it happened in 93 and it was just, and the reality is once you leave the SEC, those kind of things are not your thing anymore, right? Uh,
sure.
it's not relevant or, um, now I'm on the other side of the business and I'm trying to figure out how to do things right. So,
Yeah. Tell me about the decision to leave.
yeah, so the decision to leave, I was just kind of looking, I'd been doing what I was doing and not, it's wrong to say getting bored because, it was always something different every day and the people were great. But, you're just looking for something, a new challenge. And I knew that Bill Goldsberry was thinking about retiring. He had spoken to me about that he thought he would retire in a year or so. And, while I might not have gotten that job, I think I would have gotten that job if I had stayed. And I mean, that was certainly, the way this wind was blowing. And I didn't think I wanted that job. It was just one step that is truly administrative. That is truly like you're dealing with Washington and you're dealing with budgets and whatever,
Yeah.
going to a lot of conferences and you're quite a distance from legal stuff and cases and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't think I wanted that job. And but then you kind of are like, well, you can't stay, if you stay and you don't get the job, then you work, it's that kind of thing. Like you think,
Mhm.
well, I either have to apply for the job or I stay and it looks like I didn't get the job and now I got to work for somebody else. So you think, well, maybe it's time for me to go. And I also at that point, well, I'm certainly a lawyer and I was involved in legal work as part of my job. I had been for a number of years running a large staff. And, part of why the office was rated very highly was the utilization of our resources in the most effective manner. And uh, that kind of decision making, that was my decision making. And I felt like I was really good at that. And so I felt like my skills were kind of in two baskets. One was a lawyer, but one was I was running a large department and a fairly large budget. And I found that the more challenging thing as I was kind of looking forward. So I started thinking, and I am by nature actually kind of a business person and entrepreneurial. So I started thinking about actually buying a company, just buying a company and running a company. And I began exploring that. And I was approached by this large investment management firm in Chicago that was looking for somebody with that skill set to come in as general counsel, but kind of move into be a chief operating officer or senior executive. And so it's just like one of those weird. So I left actually without a job. So I didn't want to go to a law firm. I knew for sure I didn't want to do that. And because I didn't feel like that skill of being able to do more with less was in any way rewarded in a law firm. And so I left because I felt like I was actively pursuing buying a company, and that was not something I could do as a part-time job when I was with the government. And then I was approached by this uh, firm, and it wasn't what I was thinking, but it intrigued me. And then anyway, so that's how I ended up where I ended up going. And that was, a home run career choice. And yeah, so
Well,
kind of,
terrific.
you don't know, things work out, right?
Right. Anything else we should talk about? Anything that stands out in your memory from your time at the regional offices?
Um, I mean, no, mostly no. I mean, especially since I was associate regional administrator, I mean, I was overseeing hundreds of cases a year. And so it's not like it's hard for things to stand out this many years later. But I think that what really stands out for me of my time at the SEC was, it was, you know, one of the premier agencies. And, one working for the federal government was kind of like a premier thing over working for a more local governmental agency. And then within the federal government, the SEC, U.S. Attorney, those were maybe the FTC enforcement, those were the premier legal jobs. And I worked with a lot of really, really smart, dedicated people. And it was just, always just incredibly intellectually challenging. And, it was great to have a job where for 13 years, you never felt ethically compromised. No one ever asked you to do anything that you weren't comfortable with as an attorney. And, you know, that was, as I sit here now, I reflect on what a privilege that was.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you very much for talking to me today. I appreciate
Sure.
it. A
Okay. Nice
lot
to
of
meet you.
good. All right.
Okay. Talk to you
Take
later.
care.
Or maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Bye-bye.
guess we'll have communication about, yeah.
Yeah, I'll get back to you on the transcript.
Okay, great.
All right,
Thank you.
terrific. Thanks.
Bye.